start?
Yes, please.
Well, you can see that I live really in the heart of the village, and so it's important for me to get about. I work in the village as well. Well, I'm based at home, so I have a TV AV servicing business, and I need to be able to get out to see clients. So I need a navigable AV audio, TV and audio servicing. So I need to be able to collect and deliver equipment. Although I'm based at home, I do the work at home on stuff. And so it's important that I can get out of the village, basically. So obviously, I know a lot has been said about traffic, so I'm not going to have you all glaze over with blow-by-blow comments on that. Just to say, also my wife works in Ealing, she needs to be able to commute out of the area. So anything that can be done to minimise the impact, the obvious impact on the road structure is something that I'm seeking to achieve. If we could go on to the next slide, you'll just see some. I'm not David Bailey, so you just see. I'm sure you've seen lots of this as well. Cars. Next slide as well, please. And that's the end of that. And then the next slide. And again, please. Probably melodramatic, what I'm saying there, but basically you get the gist of it. It looks nice now. I'm worried about the appearance of it when work commences. That's just a simple illustration that I put together to show how I envisage things looking more in the area when the major work starts, setting up the CFA 07 compound. Sorry, the 06 Harville Road compound. Go to the next slide, please. And then obviously we're all familiar with that compound that I just mentioned, so we can skip on to the next one, please. Now, obviously, from a road point of view, the main concern to me is this Brackenbury cutting. I don't know if actually you refer to it as the Cocktail cutting or the Harville Road compound. I've called it that. What you see on the horizon is basically a hill that needs to be demolished and then spread all over some fields nearby. I tried to capture the sort of depth down at the track bed level where the railhead has to be established. Obviously the Colne Valley Commissioned tunnel proposal seeks to eradicate the need for that. And that would obviously be something that I would love, but I understand that it's not something that can be taken lightly. And I'm aware of the response from HS2 Limited to what their principal objections are regarding that cavern that has to be excavated and the difficulties there. And it's been likened to working through a letterbox to decorate your hallway, which I mean, maybe I would have used a different analogy along the lines of keyhole surgery or something, that it's actually a challenge to be able to demonstrate how you could implement precision and ingenuity and innovation, delivering something like that. Because the side issue that I understand that the whole project, the prestige of it, is going to be something that we're going to want to be able to showcase and maybe export new competencies that are gained, and maybe something of benefit could come from implementing the scheme. Anyway, I know that's not something that is going to be decided upon quickly. So leaving that now, if we can just flash through the next two slides quite quickly. It's just pictures I've managed to grab of where the sustainable placement is scheduled to be. And again on the I understand that one of them might have moved or something, but yeah, there's still going to be things like that roughly where they're shown, to my understanding. Next slide, please. So the alternative I just touched upon, which is the tunnel, and then I understand that quite substantial consideration was given to the simply relocating to the TfL depot and keeping the viaduct. But I also understand that HS2 Limited have raised objections regarding the logistics of that you would still have to have the Harville Road compound, and actually so that actually almost completely dials out the advantage of that relocation. So it's my understanding that that's probably off the table. Really it's just the tunnel that I'm looking for, I'm hoping for.
I'm not sure a tunnel would benefit you because it would mean West Hyde would have substantial amounts of traffic, which would mean people would divert through Harefield, so Harefield would catch it.
Yeah, and also the other objection I've got is the way it's going to look through the Colne Valley with the viaduct, but of course the views that we saw from the pub, the old orchard.
You were there that day when we had a crowd at the top.
That's it, yeah. And it's actually going to be more intensive because of the intervention gap and so on. But I mean, I still think that the mitigation to the Colne Valley itself and the absence, are we doing all right? And the absence of the congestion on the road that might arise by taking away, that compound is something. I mean, the look of it is going to be horrible. That view is going to be ruined. But irrespective of what's done, that is going to be adversely affected. So we know we have to expect that if the scheme goes ahead. So really, my focus is just about being able to get about. And there are loads of other things that are upsetting, like the impact on the Colne Valley, the restrictions upon its use. I mean, my kids will probably be leaving home by the time it actually starts to recover from the shock of it. So
clearly, if you say I'll see you at 10 o'clock and you come to fix your television or put an audio-visual system and you arrive there at 11, it isn't going to be very popular, is it?
That's never a good idea. And I've tried to just keep it to pragmatism because everyone's emotional about what it's going to do to the area potentially. So, where are we now? If we go, can we just step through and I can see what they are in terms of whether we need to spend any time on it. So, can I have the next slide, please? Okay. And we've talked about that, so we can skip that. In my petition response documentation, we pretty much pretty much knew how it was going to go, how HS2 Limited would approach the tunnelling proposition. But the only thing that is a little bit annoying, I suppose, is when we were first asking for consideration of that, it seemed to be the main reason was the passive provision for the Heathrow spurs. But when the PRD came back, there was no mention of that, and it seemed to focus mainly upon the what I've got here, which was that the Midlands River Action Group and Affinity Water, people like that were concerned about the risks of tunnelling through a chalk aquifer. The annoying thing was that, on the one hand, we were being told that that is not something that would be a good idea under the Colne Valley, but a very similar scheme is being adopted for the Chiltern Tunnel under very similar geological conditions, and HS2 sent a team of people along, which I discovered by just doing a bit of research, sent a team along of experts to argue why it's not a problem doing similar works elsewhere. So I noticed that wasn't really a theme that carried through the Hillingdon Borough hearing so much, but I don't know. I mean, I think the analogy is that it's like a subcutaneous implant, a tunnel, whereas the piers are like multiple stab wounds. So I would just hope that some of that is considered, because I understand that there could be an implication for the drinking water suppliers. And really, I think that's pretty much all I've got to say. So,
okay. Could you remind us where your wife works?
She works in Ealing Hospital in hospice.
Okay.
So she has to. Her commute is atrocious.
And there's one road through Harefield.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Yeah.
Past the hospital.
Yeah. Yeah.
Understand your concern. Thank you very much for being brief
You're very
and
welcome.
going through the slides very quickly. Mr. Mould.
On that last point that Mr. Medcraft made about the need to challenge to tunnel through chalk, the committee won't need reminding that the issue that was raised last week by Hillingdon was not so much the feasibility of tunnelling through chalk, including chalk which carried a drinking water aquifer, but whether there was a clear comparative advantage in tunnelling through chalk rather than founding a viaduct in chalk. And our position on that, as you recall, was that we were prepared to assume that essentially, in terms of engineering and controlling potential impacts on the aquifer, going through the chalk or founding a viaduct in the chalk were essentially neutral. That was the position I took last week. And so I hope that gives some comfort to the petitioner on that point. Last Thursday, the 18th of June, in the morning, if you recall, I sought to summarise our position in relation to the perceived advantages of a main construction site for the Northolt Tunnel at the TfL depot at West Ruislip as opposed to Harville Road. I won't go through those points again because they're on the record. The other point perhaps to remind the committee of is that we have given assurances to Buckinghamshire County Council in relation to the A412. If you remember, it took the form of three principal points. The first was that we will seek to bring the N25 slips into operation as soon as we reasonably can and in advance of the main construction works at West Hyde. Secondly, that whilst we're constructing the slips, the traffic on the A412 will be limited to construction traffic for that purpose and to the and to certain limited categories of traffic which are associated with site setup at West Hyde. And the third was that we would carry out a review of the operation of three specified junctions on the A412 that Buckinghamshire were particularly concerned about. And if that review showed that those junctions would be at or about capacity and that the position would be materially worsened by the introduction of HS2 traffic, that then we would commit to spend up to £100,000 on works to improve the performance of those junctions. So those, I think, are the key points. I did show you, Mr. Straw, I think, may have showed you a sequence of slides which show the phasing of operations at the Harville Road work site, passing from initial site setup all the way through to the 4 years of railway fit-out that will be. And you remember we saw that actually from a relatively early point that site is being progressively restored to effectively to agricultural and open uses. I'm not going to show you those again unless you'd like me to, but we may come to them a bit later today.
Okay, thank you. When we heard a number of petitioners from Harefield in March, I mean, we saw a lot of photos of lorries stopped and traffic's jammed up, and clearly there are going to be difficulties and problems that need managing. And it shouldn't be anybody's objective but to be helpful to local businesses as far as one can.
Yeah, lovely.
Any brief final comment, Mr. Medcraft?
I think that really concludes it. I mean, the thing is, I was scheduled prior to the GE, but it had to be put now, so you will have heard so much from people in my area. It's not probably productive to go through.
Yeah. How is business?
Could be better.
Are you getting paid?
Just about.
Okay.
Everyone has a different perspective on what being paid is.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your
You're very
attendance.
welcome.
Yeah,
Thank
you.
you.
All right. We now move on to Bidwells, who are representing 1170, Brennan Jean Dawson, 1169, Toby and William Dalton, 318 West London Composting Limited, of which I understand we're going to get a short statement, 319 Martin and Jennifer Grundon.
Am I allowed?
Welcome back.
Hey, Chairman. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Mr. Chairman, we've got four petitioners that I'm appearing for this morning. We think it's sensible to deal with them all as a group because they are relatively close proximity to each other.
Okay.
One of them, West London Composting, I think we're almost there in resolving things, so I've got a very short statement to deal with that.
Okay.
But the rest of them, I think we need to deal with together the other three because the principles are pretty generic in terms of the impact of the scheme.
Do you want to dispose of West London Composting first,
yes,
and then we can
that would be the most sensible thing. That West London Composting have in recent days received some revised plans from HS2, particularly their plans P6870 and P6871, which I'm not sure if we've got them up. And these avoid the maturation site. West London Composting, I think you've been to the site, so rather than explain in detail, if I point that the red box in the middle is the maturation site, and the plans now seem to avoid that. We have asked HS2 for a definitive assurance that an additional provision will be brought in to this committee. We haven't had that definitive assurance yet, and therefore if we don't get that definitive assurance, we would like to reserve the right to come back and talk to you, but provided we get that definitive assurance, we will be content with that position.
Okay, fine.
So,
yeah.
Just for the record, really.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, I think it might be sensible, if we have an overview of the other properties affected, Mr. and Mrs. Grundon, Mr. and Mrs. Dawson, and the Dalton brothers, who all farm within the proximity of the line. I'm not sure whether we have got a plan showing all of them in context with each other.
Yeah, we can show you. P6905 gives an overview. P6907.
So that's P6. That shows the Grundon's property. If I point with my finger here, Mr. and Mrs. Grundon live in this property here, Ruislip Farm, which is approximately a mile from the trace of the route. The proposal is to bring a large quantity of what's known as sustainable placement to the areas highlighted in red and in green to their property, which is mainly farmland. Mr. Grundon also has a part share in another property here, which is also similarly affected. The impact of the sustainable placement is significant on their properties, you would imagine. They have a pair of cottages just where I'm pointing here, right next to the maturation site, which the sustainable placement comes right up to the rear garden. Clearly up here where they live, the sustainable placement proposals come right up to their garden as well. The proposals there effectively take out virtually all of their farmland. So the impact of the scheme is significant, particularly when they are quite some way from the trace. Similarly, if we can go to Dalton and Dawson.
Dawson is on 6873.
And we're on the other side of the railway line now. The red there is Mr. Dawson's property. The block next to the railway is similarly affected with proposals for a mixture of sustainable placement, and I think there's going to be a compound. There is also a proposal under an additional provision to utilise this block of land here, where the rectangular,
the small one,
at a 90-degree angle for storage of material, which will take up the majority of that area. You again will see Mr. Dawson and his family live here at the farmstead. The impact of the scheme is therefore significant. Mr. Dalton, you can clearly see him on that same plan. He owns the grey area, or the majority of the grey area, that fits in the 90-degree angle approximately there. And his farmhouse... Okay. And his farmhouse sits in there. So the other blocks of land that are shown grey that he doesn't own, he has an agricultural tenancy on, so he actually farms that whole block of land. Again, the scheme takes out virtually his entire land holding and comes right up to the back of his house. So I think that's an overview of the circumstances with which we're faced. Principally, we have a number of generic concerns about this. One is the principle of sustainable placement and how sustainable it actually is, and the impact that might have going forward. Two, if it is deemed that the sustainable placement should be appropriate, what happens to the land afterwards, and what are the appropriate designations? And I'm sure we'll see some plans in a minute that show the majority of this land is then shown as either being woodland planting or grassland habitat, which, without any assurances to us, seems to rule out any future agricultural operations on the farms at all. And that, given the proximity of these farms to the urban fringe, these families have farmed this land for many years. They've got a tight community. It appears that there is a risk of wiping out the complete agricultural community in this area.
It's the one unusual part of this part of London that are actually farms.
Yes. And the Dalton family have milked cows and provided milk for generations to central London. And the Dawson family have farmed, and the Grundon family have farmed for many years. These are people who've been here a long time. And the scheme at the moment pays no due to that, and it just says, oh, there's a bit of land, let's put soil on it. And this is the crux of it. If the sustainable placement is necessary, and we have concerns that it is necessary, then if it happens, what state does it leave the land in afterwards? And what is the impact of the supposed environmental designations, the woodland habitat and the grassland habitat creation there afterwards? And the concerns particularly are that we have very little information from HS2 as to that. You know, we're getting a bit more information now, but it's been sketchy. There are some specific issues and some specific points that we would like to deal with in terms of the individuals, in terms of if it is deemed that sustainable placement, this land will be used for sustainable placement, we would like to come up with some proposals to try and push back the barriers so certainly they are away from the residential dwellings, so these people can have some form of sensible living, particularly during construction and thereafterwards, and not be surrounded by big piles of soil and dust and everything else that goes with it. And if I can turn to Mr. Grundon, or the Grundons to begin with, we have produced an exhibit which is number A1131. We can find that one. Which I hopefully can explain this. Our intention, or our proposal, is that we push back the areas of sustainable placement so they're curtailed by the thick brown lines, which we would like to create some form of bunding between our property and the works, particularly during construction, so we're screened from it. And then we have the sensible paddocks around the property that we can continue to use the cottages at the bottom left-hand corner and the house at the top. Mr. and Mrs. Grundon keep horses, and they also run a kennels there, and they need somewhere to exercise their horses, and they need somewhere for their kennels. And the current proposals, we have nothing. And so our proposal is that we have some additional provisions come in that push back these boundaries and take part of the sustainable placement out, so that we can at least have some functionality going through the construction scheme.
Usable amenity land.
Yes. That is, I think, where we pretty much are with Mr. and Mrs. Grundon. Specifically, I'll come back to the woodland and the habitat creation as a general point, but specifically that's what we would like to do with them. If I can go back to the previous slide, which showed Mr. Dalton.
Just before we go on, can you be reminded of what the height of this?
Well, I'm very glad you asked that. In the HS2 documents, they state that the height will be 3 metres.
Up to.
Yet they produced recently an additional cross-section that indicatively seems to be higher than 3 metres. So I'm working on 3 metres, but I think we need clarity on that to confirm that it will be no more than 3 metres. If I can point to Mr. Dalton's homestead, what we asked for, and you can probably see the faint outline, there is a slightly rectangular shaped paddock running down there.
It can be zoomed a bit, I think. Which
we have similarly asked if we can push back the boundaries there to enable Mr. Dalton to have some form of living. And the principle of that is we would save the mature hedgerow, which has been there for many years, and if they could taper the sustainable placement coming up to the field behind it, that would at least, in the same way as Mr. and Mrs. Grundon, it would give them some form of functionality.
Mr. Briggs, could you just, I'm sure you covered it, but could you just remind me what's happening in the grey sort of dog-tooth areas around the edge?
Those areas are not owned by Mr. Dalton.
Right.
They're owned by a separate company that have owned them historically for many years. I suspect it was at a time when there was ribbon development built before we had.
But Mr. Dalton uses it.
Yeah, he has an agricultural tenancy of it.
Right.
He's got a lifetime tenancy, right. And it's a secure, and he will have succession.
So although he doesn't own it, he loses the use of it.
He uses it. Yes, he farms it.
Okay.
Just to answer that point, I've put up this plan that shows our proposed final arrangement, and you can see that those areas would form part of the overall scheme for sustainable placement.
And that plan quite clearly shows the hedge line of the field that we are looking to exclude. You can see that one there, and that's the one we would like out of it.
There seems to be, sorry to interrupt, 2 issues. One is whether around the habitations there can be land which can be used and give them some better life and better use. And the second question is, assuming you have this sustainable placement, raising of the land with spoil, what it should appropriately be used for, and whether future agricultural use has to be ruled out, and whether it has to be woodland or grass or something. And those seem to be the 2 issues.
Yes, yeah. and I'd like to come back to that sort of generic point. But those are the specifics of what we would like to try and deal with. If we go on to the need or otherwise of sustainable placement, we do question the whole policy here of just finding a piece of land and chucking lots of soil on it. And I accept that there's a balance between traffic movements and other, but some of this land is over a mile away from the trace. And it does seem to me that, is this an appropriate use of land, particularly the proximity to the urban fringe? Is it not possible to come up with a further proposal, even if there's a need for some sustainable placement? The volumes that we are seeing on this land and elsewhere seem to me unacceptable.
Again, forgive me for asking a question which we probably had the answer before. Does the spoil get here by lorry, or does it get here on the moving belt?
It gets here by lorry, which travels over dedicated haul roads that are created for that purpose. We can show you that on the previous slide, P6924. This relates obviously to the areas to the south of the railway line, which concern Mr. Dalton. But you can see marked out in the yellow are the so the source of the arisings, the source of the material is the construction of the Copthall cutting to create the Harville Road railhead, and then the material is brought by wagon along these haul roads which are created for that purpose, and then in order to deposit the material on Mr. Dalton's land, obviously the wagons come along that spur and then move across the site.
In effect, promoters are keeping the haul lorries off the public roads.
That's the idea.
Which is presumably the reason. It's not just a straight cost one; it's also a community.
You have it in a nutshell, if that makes sense. Yeah.
But the other problem is, because you don't want to make it obtrusive, it's only 3 metres, which means you need more hectares to do it.
Yeah.
I can remember a conversation we had with Stephen Pound and Ealing about bench shafts, about whether the spoil could go where the area off the A40 where the kids play on, which is an artificial hill.
Yeah.
So whether one could find somewhere in the area just to ruin one site.
The economic ski slope.
Yeah, the economic.
Well, I rather rudely interjected when Mr. Briggs was speaking a few moments ago, but just to emphasise the words up to 3 metres. I mean, I can come back to this later.
But I think yeah. 1 metre extra or not is one. It's a visual issue.
Yeah.
The question is whether you can use less land if you have it higher, and whether discussions with the farmers could take place. And
I think that's a given.
Given the proportionality between, for instance, the hedged area, which was the paddock, and the rest of the land, if you took that paddock out, you might add another half a metre or less to the overall lane, and that might be a matter of negotiation.
Mr. Miller will speak to you briefly about this in a moment, but I think you can take that as a given. We're clearly not going to be looking to force either of Mr. Briggs's clients to accept materials at significant height in very close proximity in the areas you mentioned. I mean, that's something which we need to have as a priority when we get to the detail of this, and we need to discuss very closely with his clients that kind of thing, so that we can make the practical arrangements can work for them as best we can.
It does seem, Mr. Moore, that given the overall land take of this particular petitioner's land use, the retention of the paddock seems like a small ask, doesn't it?
It's an entirely reasonable ask, and whilst I can't make an unqualified promise as to precisely what we can do, we will put that. I mean, let's put it this way: that'll be right at the top of the agenda for the design, the detailed design.
What's the difference between a given and an unqualified?
You're assuming that I'm someone who could answer that question as a lawyer. It's pretty close. Pretty close. Yeah.
I meant to break into your presentation, Mr. Briggs, but I was trying to clear my mind about what the issues were.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Now, the next stage is, again, I think this picking up from where I was, talking about sustainable placement generally and the impact here. We can understand, or our clients can understand, the need for certainly some temporary storage because of the construction constraints. But it does seem to me that if we look at the HS2 hybrid build proposals on sustainable placement, which I don't know what number they are, but they're...
6255
is that one there?
62551.
I don't know whether we can look at that. And this talks about a hierarchy of dealing with the waste and particularly sustainable placement. And it also talks about the West Ruislip railhead as being critically important. And the second paragraph states that the surplus material generated during the excavation of the tunnel will be transported off-site via the West Ruislip railhead. So there's a principle there that once that railhead is built, the material from the tunnel will be taken away. But then it goes on to the fourth paragraph, and it says the majority of the surplus excavated material generated prior to the operation of the Ruislip railhead will be disposed of through the sustainable placement. Now, the question I would pose here is, once the West Ruislip railhead is in operation, is it not beyond the wit of our incredibly clever engineers and transport planners to use the railhead to take off the material to the larger area, I think at Calvert was mentioned, or wherever it might be, and temporarily store that soil, so that we can then have something back afterwards that we can carry on using as we've done before.
Is this topsoil or is this...
No, this is sustainable placement. It seems to me that if we can move it, rather than spending a lot of energy in making it all very pretty and flat, and why don't we just pile it up as many other schemes do, and just move it off-site once the railhead is going? Now, I, without wanting to take any words out of Mr. Miller's mouth, I suspect that they'll say that they're looking at that, but looking at that is not quite the assurance that I would like. You know, it's like other assurances we get. Well, our assurance will be maybe, but maybe is equally maybe not.
It's an oft-used phrase in my neck of the woods that there's a hole appeared in the road and officials from Gateshead Council are looking into it.
Yeah, exactly. exactly. That's exactly. And I've heard a lot of that in the recent past.
But in that case, if I may say so, the road exists. Whereas here we're at a much earlier stage in the planning of a railway, and as you know, detailed design is something that is to come.
Yeah. But if a road's got a major hole in it, it's not a road anymore.
Well, the other point, Mr. Mould, is that people who have businesses have to plan.
Of course.
And they can't wait for the railway to do the detailed planning, otherwise their businesses are going to go bust.
And I entirely accept that point, and we must move as fast as we reasonably can on this.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker.
That's the point. And in terms of, if I struggle to accept the HS2 position, is that we don't really know, which I suspect is what Mr. Miller will tell you, without wishing to put words in his mouth. This is a very important scheme, has a fundamental impact on people's lives, and I don't really know, it's not good enough, quite frankly. So that's the position on sustainable placement. We have very little information on the impact of it, the drainage, the maintenance of it going forward, the stability of it. We have nothing. Then I can go on to the supposed habitat creation, and clearly I've spoken to this committee before about woodland being identified, areas of woodland, and if we can go back to a plan that will show the final intentions of the land with which numbers are we talking about? That sounds like a good one, yes, and there'll be another one for Mr. Grundon as well.
P6931 will do it for you. 6931. This is the Dawson.
This is Dalton and Dawson. Now it's different with my failing eyesight. The field, that one there, that's proposed to have woodland planting. and the remainder, I believe, is grassland habitat creation. This is at the end. Now, I'm assuming at the moment that under Schedule 15 this land will be returned to us, and we'll briefly talk about that in a minute. But what we are still very unclear of is what the designation of grassland habitat creation means. Does that mean that we can farm it in the way we farmed it, which is a mix of arable and grass? Does it mean that we have to maintain it in aspect as if it were a special site of scientific interest? Or what does it mean? If in 20 or 30 years' time this land was zoned for development, if planning policy changed, does that mean that that land is precluded from that use because of the covenants with HS2? We have no idea, and we would like some clarity on that. Similarly with the woodland, we've talked about previously, and I don't want to sort of labour the point about this no net loss in biodiversity. This land is actually, as it stands, quite a diverse ecological reserve. There's a lot of wildlife on it. Frankly, we don't need trees planted on it to continue and maintain that. We have limited enough acreage as it is, and not only we've got to suffer either a temporary or permanent land piling on it, or the deposition of soil onto it, then to add insult to injury, you then have trees planted on it, which does nothing for us, and we can't use it. And we've had this before. I've seen nothing yet from HS2 that the metric that's calculated gives them the ability, the definitive answer for this. There seems to be a subjective opinion. And standing back and looking where we are, there has got to be a better solution. It's almost an insult to my clients to say that they don't farm it in an ecological way. They do. They've looked after it for years. They don't need HS2 or anyone else telling them how to do it.
We've heard that from almost every farmer up the line. They accept there's a railway going across, but when they lose 2 or 3 more fields for tree planting or something, then that drives them around the bend.
But I have to labour the point, Mr. Chairman. And in the similar point for Mr. Grundon on the I don't know if we've got his plan. And here again, we have, my eyesight's failing, but I think these colours are deliberately designed to, we have grassland and woodland habitat there. And the similar thing, that this is a small land holding, it's important to us. What are we going to end up with? And there has got to be a better way of dealing with this. It's got to be a more transparent and open and definitive approach. Not this one that is hidden by closed doors saying, well, this is an opinion of someone you never really get to talk to. So those points are... I'm not sure there's much more I can say that hasn't already been said on that. Turning to future ownership, and we are concerned that we do hopefully get this land returned to us under Schedule 15. I am concerned that the economic test that's referred to in Schedule 15 is less than clear. And I think the phrase is, when economic to do so, the land will be returned. But no one specifically said to me yet, yes, that land will definitely be returned. And again, to use Mr. Mearns' phrase, I was told that under the assurances given that this Secretary of State may only acquire the permanent interest. I'd rather say will only require the permanent interest rather than may only, because we need some definition. If this land is not going to be returned for us in 6 or 7 years' time, we might all well pack up and go away. And it's just not good enough to have these mays and maybes and what ifs. We need specifics. And if the scheme isn't properly designed at the moment, well, why are we here petitioning now until we actually know what we're dealing with? So if an air of frustration comes out, it's because I've been living with this a long time, and we seem to be still no clear on a lot of things. So I think those are the generic issues. There's a specific issue with Mr. Dawson, particularly. Mr. Dawson is sitting behind me, and I don't want to particularly. But Mr. Dawson is a certain age that inheritance tax becomes quite a relevant issue to him. He's in his 80s, and I've been given copies of various letters from HMRC in respect of how the tax position will be treated in these circumstances, but it doesn't really give the clarity that Mr. Dawson needs. We've talked about the unusual nature of where this land is, these small farms, and given what is happening, if this proposal goes ahead, that agricultural land will be wiped out. Now, Mr. Dawson, the chance of him being able to buy additional agricultural land will be infinitesimal, because there is just none around, and he's not going to buy a 10-acre field in Northampton. If he loses land, he will suffer in terms of his age, and inheritance tax will be a big issue. This at the moment, he can pass this down to his family tax-free under current rules because it's an agricultural holding. And I appreciate this committee is not going to change Treasury tax collection rules, but all I would like is some guidance to HS2 that they need to take this into account when dealing with the compensation issues. The wording I've seen so far in respect of HMRC doesn't go that far, and if there is additional tax liability created by this, I believe it's only right and proper that HS2 should deal with that in compensation.
We have taken up these issues with the Exchequer Secretary of the Treasury, HMRC, and they've sort of moved a little bit, but basically their argument is the HMRC are reasonable people. Clearly, down the line, a farmer wants rather more than that. There is flexibility in the law, but I think we need something much more specific about how the extraordinary circumstances of the railway will affect farmers, not only in phase 1, but phase 2, and phase 3, all the way up the line, because clearly this will have a big impact, and on capital gains tax.
I understand, and it's really re-emphasising the point because it's specifically relevant, given Mr. Dawson's age, it's a specific concern to him. And that's really, I think, pretty much. I've dealt with sustainable placement, I've dealt with the land take, the habitat creation, the tax positions, moving the boundaries back. I think at the moment that's pretty much our position and our concerns, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, all right. Well, we're going to have to pay the HMRC again, I think, on tax before we finish.
Would it help if we asked Mr. Briggs if he would like to write to the committee, not necessarily pinning Mr. Dawson's name to it, but illustrating one or two examples of what can happen if you're either caught in an interim basis or you can't find replacement land and you're at an age where...
I can do that.
Thank you.
And copy at the local member of Parliament.
Yeah, I can do that.
Yeah, okay. Mr. Moore.
Just on that point, can I just remind the committee of one thing that I made clear when we heard the presentation from the Country Landowners Association and the National Farmers Union. I did say that as a matter of basic legal principle, where a tax liability is incurred by a person whose land is compulsorily purchased or which is used compulsorily, I make that point advisedly, and that, but for that acquisition or use, that tax liability would not have been incurred, and they are not otherwise able to set that liability off, then that liability to that extent will form part of their claim for land compensation. That is the established position.
We understand that.
Yes.
That's helpful, and we're all grateful to have heard that. If I am an 85-year-old farmer,
yes,
with the expectation that my land could go down to my children and to their children without having the inheritance tax, but because the land has been either bought from me or taken to be used, and I then die, that inheritance tax, what the committee has heard, might be affected by whether I die before or after the land is taken or used, or when it's returned. So
Yes.
there are uncertainties which are still built in, which
it's
not the forum to solve all that.
Absolutely. I entirely accept that, and I wasn't in any way seeking to suggest that there was a simple solution. It was simply that there is an underlying legal regime which the committee knows about, and that I've just, in deference to Mr. Briggs, I thought I would
Which is a
mention.
convention rather than a commitment.
The real problem, Mr. Mould, is that would require probably the family who involved going back to the project and there being further discussion, negotiation and time passing. And I think somehow we just need to have a clearer, so people have a map and know where they're actually going,
Of course.
rather than they're going to have an argument with HS2 for 5 or 6 or 10 years over whether or not some money's going to be.
Yes, it's what I said is very much a backstop. I understand. I accept that.
And the circumstances are ones which might justify 3 subjunctives.
Yes, I fear it's an inescapable function of expressing a legal proposition, as you know. Yeah. Thank you. I'm going to call Mr. Miller, if I may, to deal with the first question.
Morning.
And we'll put up P62551, please. Mr. Miller, Mr. Briggs has a number of questions, the first of which was we're not entirely convinced by the case for sustainable placement. So I just wondered if you can just, to a degree, remind the committee of why that's a feature of the scheme in this area.
Yes, what we've got to do is what we're thinking about is building the tunnel and getting to a point where we can make that our construction railhead work as efficiently as possible. So in doing that, we've got to think about building that out, taking down the ground just to the north of the Chiltern line, the Coptal cutting, which I think you may have heard about yesterday, and get that ready so that we can get a railhead in place to make the construction effort a little easier all round for the tunnel and for the rest of the build.
And just to pick up the penultimate, but the middle bullet on this page really summarises the point that the material we're dealing with here is really principally material that is associated with the creation of the railhead and the facility at the Coptal cutting.
That's right, because the railhead's not available to us sort of day one. We've got to sort of build the railhead before we can get on with the build of the railway. And there's a sort of sequence of activities that need to be accounted for.
And then the penultimate bullet makes the point that I think the committee themselves mentioned a few moments ago, that there's an environmental balance being struck here between more vehicles on the road and an alternative means of dealing with that material before the railhead becomes available.
That's right. People are very much concerned about the use of the roads in this area, and our response is to try and tackle that and get a rounded approach to build the railway and to keep everything on programme.
The final point, I think, is an important one, isn't it? That we haven't reached the end of the road here. We continue to examine ways of improving the quantity of material that we can take away by rail, and that's something which continues to be pursued with the relevant rail authorities.
That's right. We're very much challenging the sustainable placements that's in the bill to see whether we can make improvements to overcome the traffic issues and to limit the effect on people's land, the concerns that Mr. Briggs has been talking about this morning, and some of that we are more confident about now. We're getting more confident as more detail comes forward, and what I'm expecting is that when we get into the detailed design proper, which is not right at this moment, it's to come, and when we get into the design and build phase, then we should be bringing other people's views about how to construct this railway to bear on this particular issue. And we think that that is going in one direction to help reduce sustainable placement, and we also think that that will help with the traffic situation as well.
Can I ask something to be clear? Clearly a spoil heap is temporary, sustainable placement is permanent.
That's right.
Okay. And could there be any situation where it wasn't permanent, it was just till the project is finished and one tried to return some of the land, took the soil off, took the planting off and returned something to agricultural land?
It's possible. We've sort of talked about that on the other side of the Colne Valley. Ideally, we would like to ensure that we are handling the material once. That's the best situation. That's the most economic way of dealing with things. So that's really the challenge in all of this. As soon as you get into 2 or 3 different movements, you're into something more expensive. In some ways, that actually provides a clue to where the contractors will go to with this. They will look to minimise that. If we've got we're demonstrating that we are trying to reduce the sustainable placement, we can aim to improve on that, challenge the contractors further, and then they can decide how they're going to get that spoil away. But you're right, you could hold it and you could take it away at a later stage, but your costs will go up.
Can we then just turn on to the next slide, pick up a couple of points that have been raised. First of all, the duration of this aspect of the scheme is dealt with in the second bullet there, isn't it?
That's right, 18 months, yes, at each of the sites.
We also address we give a basic indication of the dimensions of sustainable placement on any given site in the penultimate bullet on that page.
That's right, yeah. We've worked to the maximum height of 3 metres. And
we'll come to this in a moment, but we say as a matter of general principle, the land restored as ecological planting will return to agriculture. We'll come back to that in a moment.
Yeah.
And then a point that you've made already, that we will continue to examine options to reduce the amount of excavated material for sustainable placement.
Yeah, that's an ongoing process.
If we then just turn on to number 4, P62554, there's a graph which we'll just comment on briefly, and then I want to go to a couple of phasing plans. Just tell us what this is showing us, Mr. Miller.
What this is showing is the various stages of excavation, and it gives an indication of our ability to get material away using the railhead.
So stage 1, does that correspond to any particular sustainable placement site in this area which Mr. Briggs's clients are concerned with?
What's happening here is we're taking out the material essentially from the Cocktail cutting to get to the railhead itself, to get that sort of flat piece of ground, and the material is moving away to the north of the Chiltern line and onto the Grundon family's land in the New Year's Green area. So it's the northern part. So the land will be built up there in the first instance.
And then,
sorry, what are the units on this?
That's just to help you with that. So half of
it looks like widths and depths.
It's cubic metres on the bottom there, which is the horizontal axis.
Well, at some stage,
yeah, it's cubic metres of material, I think.
On the up or the across?
Is it on the vertical axis? That's metres on the bottom. And cubic. Right. I'll confirm that with you in a minute. Can you just do me a note on that? And then the second stage, we can see that the railhead is beginning to come into operation. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. So once you get your railhead in place, then it starts to open up opportunities to move material away by rail to another location or away from this area.
Okay. And I want to illustrate that on a timeline, and if we turn to P6210, please. These are the maps that show the phases of the activities at Harville Road. They're focused on traffic movements, but they do help to give an indication of the broad phasing of the sustainable placement activity. So this is phase 2, which, as you can see from the timeline towards the bottom of the page, is years 2 to 3 of the construction phase.
That's right.
And we can see there we can see that the Copthall cutting is being excavated.
That's the hatched area there.
Yes. And then we can see things going on the Grundon land. The brown areas are what?
That's topsoil stripping in this area, and then you can see the two areas which you saw on the aerial photograph a little earlier. Those are the areas that start to receive that material from that land, from the Copthall cutting.
And we can see that at this stage nothing of significance is happening on Mr. Dalton or Mr. Dawson's land.
No, that comes a bit later. That comes in another stage.
And if we then turn to the next slide, P6211, phase 3.
So whilst we're waiting for that, as we're getting into that phase, you can see on the Grundon's land, that's drawing to a close there, and the plan for mitigation and the compensation is being implemented. And then at this time, the land
compensation, the grassland and the trees, or is compensation money to people?
So from my perspective, it's for the grassland and trees. There is that other form of compensation, which is money, obviously. And then
we can see that the topsoil storage at the top in the area of the Grundon's land has gone by this time.
That's right.
Which reflects the completion.
That will have moved back in as part of a restoration plan on that land. So that material, which is sort of skimmed off, will then be reused. And
then if we move south of the railway, we see that things are beginning to happen on Mr. Dawson and Mr. Dalton's land.
Yes, that's right. And on this plan it shows an area of land just here, which is part of an additional provision, which is used for topsoil storage. So we've got material coming out of here, needing to be handled in this area of land here, and through the plans as we developed them, we needed more land in the additional provision because of the topsoil placement. So that gets displaced from here into that area of land here. So that brings into that into account through our construction proposals.
And then if we move to the next phase, that was taking us to the end of year 3. If we move to the next phase, which is 6212 rather. Is this the phase in which we see the use of Mr. Dalton's land is now increased?
That's right. The sustainable placement is taking place because at the moment we see that the train movements are taking the material away from the tunnel by rail, and so we've still got material which is coming into here, and that, as you can see it we've got it at the moment sort of from south to north, being restored, albeit at a higher level when we've raised the land as part of this sustainable placement activity.
And then that takes us up through to year 6. And then just to complete the picture, if we go to the next slide, P6213. This is just to complete the sequence.
Yeah.
By the end of, got it.
You can see what's happening here. We're sort of finalising the land restoration and sustainable placement. On this plan it's showing bringing back the fields into the same sort of grain as they are at the moment. That the topsoil storage area has disappeared over here. That'll be restored to essentially the current use. And then the sort of final activity up here, which is the woodland, will be replaced in that sort of final stage. So that's broadly the plan at the moment. The reason why we can't get on with the sort of final outcome in this location is because that's the area where we're going to use that's the area we'll use for the tunnel segments, the manufacture there, and that goes across and then down to fit out the tunnel.
Thank you. Now, we can see from that sequence and the evidence you've given that there's an interaction between rail-based removal of material, including tunnel spoil and other arisings from the work side, and the need for sustainable placement. But insofar as the Grundon land is concerned, at the moment, given where that sits within the overall construction phasing that we've just seen, do you see there as being realistically much opportunity to remove the need for sustainable placement on that land, given where it sits within the overall phasing of the project?
No, because the cocktail cutting here requires us to move the material away, and we don't have the opportunity to get that away by rail. And so our plan is to take that up on the haul roads, which we've identified, and then place do the land raise in those areas of land. So everything is happening to the north in that first phase. And so in our plan, the Grundon's land receives that material.
But is the position the same in relation to Mr. Dalton's land, which, as we've seen, comes into play a little later in the programme?
Sorry, is it the same?
Is it the same? Are there any opportunities to seek to reduce the degree of usage of Mr. Dalton's land, subject to further work on the detailed design of the project?
Yes, we see that there are opportunities for that, and I think that we're at a point where we probably can't do very much about that at the moment. We need to understand more about the detailed design and the final construction arrangements. But it seems to me that there's a prospect with the railhead of looking at that again.
Thank you. I'd like then to... can we just go back to P62554?
Is the railhead permanent, or is it just there for the construction and fitting out?
It does remain as a permanent facility because it will provide a maintenance siding for the railway. Yes. I hope I can answer the question you pose about the X and the Y axis. The Y axis is metres in height, and the X axis is metres width. So what it's showing is a cross section, effectively, of the volumes of material at the various stages of the process of sustainable placement. Thank you. Now, Mr. Miller, that's the first of Mr. Briggs's questions, which is about the case for sustainable placement and how it would operate as a construction technique. Can we go to the next question, which is the after-use issue? And for that purpose, I think we'll take the Grundons first and put up A1131, if we may. You heard Mr. Briggs's...
is this the Newton, the invertebrates one, or is that one of the other ones?
This is the...
That's the next one.
This is the sort of cordon sanitaire, I think, to provide the Grundons with some usable grazing land, and also to provide some degree of separation, I think, from the dwellings and the sustainable placement. What's your response on this in terms of the detailed design and restoration process?
I was talking about this with Mr. Briggs before we came into the committee room, and I understand that this is, and as you said, it's essentially providing a buffer to the properties where people live. So I think we need to sit down and have a discussion about that and see how we can work that into our final plans to provide that buffer on that land. So I think there's a good prospect of that being worked through. I'm not sure it will look exactly like that when we get to it, but I can understand where you're coming from. You're largely looking at the field boundaries in each case, and I think that there is scope to try and emulate that with our earthfield bunding around and trying to get those properties back to a more pleasant outlook.
And then
so
if we...
Sorry, do you want just on that specific point, do you want to come in on that, just that, Mr. Briggs? Are you happy with that?
I'm happy to have a further discussion, and I suppose it depends on how far that discussion goes, and I make the point that I've had a number of discussions with HS2, but it's actually getting some specifics that concerns me. It's this maybe or will.
I mean, it's getting a decision which is more important rather than discussion.
Yes, and how quickly that will be, and if we can't get satisfaction, whether we can come back to this committee.
I think the easiest thing for us would be, and perhaps the most productive for you, is after the discussions, if there is agreement, someone might let us know. If there isn't agreement, to have in writing what the disagreements are would be a helpful thing.
Yeah, we certainly would want to report back. Sorry to interrupt you, Mr.
Not at all. Could I just very quickly go through the other points with on the same theme, effectively? So, Mr. Miller, if we can just turn to P6918. And again, I hope with a view to the process that's just been identified, taking this point in as well. Mr. Briggs' evidence was that he would wish the landowners' wishes as regards after use of this land to be taken into account by the project, and careful consideration to how, as far as reasonably possible, those wishes, those aspirations could be met. We can see the balance between woodland and grassland, and we know that it's intended that there should be an ecological benefit from both of those. Does that rule out productive grazing and equestrian use of these lands, and the arrangement of the balance between woodland and grassland to allow for that?
I think all of that can be accommodated. We've laid out our plan for the environmental statement, and even on this plan it's moved on because of the composting facility. So I think that as part of that discussion we can have that continued debate to see how we can make this land work well from an ecological perspective, and to work as well as we can get it for those who own it and operate their business from it. So we'll do our best to try and come up with a plan to help that along.
Mr. Miller, the opening line was that more of that can be accommodated, but it's the scale of the more which is the important factor, isn't it?
It is. We do have to meet our commitments for the mitigation, for the ecological response, the compensation and mitigation that we've set out in our plans. So I can't draw on here directly today what that would look like. I think that needs to be a sensible conversation with the landowner and with our ecologists, but I'm sure that we can come up with a good plan which will accommodate both.
So it's a practically usable moor as opposed to a gesture moor.
Yeah, I think the plan which was shown a little earlier on looks at the land just up here where there is a desire, I believe, for a paddock. You'll correct me if I'm wrong. And in this area to make sure that's all sort of grassland and available for the business use. Now in there, I know it's a bit difficult to see on these screens, but there is grassland in there. So I think that actually there's quite a lot of scope to get that right there. A little bit further down there's some woodland, and it may be that we swap over the woodland and the grassland to accommodate that in the best way possible. It's all happening in the same sort of place, and I think that if we can get a similar outcome, perhaps in a slightly different configuration on that land, I think we can accommodate both objectives.
And the status of the land, I mean, although it's in the bill for a particular use, the petitioner's representative raised the point, 10, 20, 30 years, does this give any special status to the land?
It is providing a response to the environmental effects reported in the environmental statement. So it's directly related to the bill and how it will be enacted. If there is a further development potential, and this might be more relevant for the other area of land, as I understand it, if Greenbelt were to be released and new housing were to infill that triangle of land, then the mitigation compensation would have to be accounted for as part of that development. So whoever comes forward at that point, they will have to take that into account and provide an alternative response. And that will have to be dealt with the authorising body at that moment in time.
Okay. But it doesn't preclude the farmers' great-grandchildren becoming multimillionaires?
No, I don't think this is...
Mr Briggs, do you want to...
stymie this?
Connectivity was one of the words that is here that makes sense. From my days as Minister of Medcraft, Northern Ireland, we often found that a hedge and double headland provided connectivity rather than having to give a whole field.
Yeah.
Is that still roughly the same for some things?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, the hedgerows through here are obviously very important, and because we've taken the sort of the ecological response out of the composting facility, then I think that there is an issue with making sure that those sorts of things are part of that connectivity. And in fact, when you look at it through this sort of lozenge of land as it goes back down to the remnants of the Copthall woodland, you can see those hedgerows, and you can get a feel for how we're trying to link these things up and create blocks of woodland as well as improving grassland. And there'll be hedgerows in there as well.
And for the bats, it's a question of where they can rest and whether the conditions are such as provide them with a larder.
Yes, yeah, they need bats like flying around places where there's something to eat. And so, yeah, and here, through here, this will reinforce that and hopefully support those species.
Before I go back to Mr Mould, Mr Briggs, you broadly happy with that?
Specifically on the future development side, perhaps the more specific issue that's more likely to rise rather than a great housing estate is, for example, the West London composting site with the increase in green waste recycling. That's grown over a period of time. The likelihood is that will continue to grow as we as a nation recycle more, particularly given that site where it takes its product from. Now, is this design going to because that seems to be woodland planting around that,
yeah.
Are we going to have a preclusion for extending the maturation site, which we're all aware of, because of these proposals?
I think my answer to you on that is that we're going to come forward with detailed plans to satisfy the local authority under Schedule 16, and they will also be keen to understand that we've been able to take account of a whole range of issues, including business interests. And I don't see this as being an exception. So it may well be that if we come forward with a plan which enables some flexibility on your land, presumably in this corner over here or whatever it is, with the woodland, that still enables that operation or that further expansion of that operation, that seems to me to be compatible. So I think there is still scope for understanding what your objectives are on that land. And yes, if we've all seen that site, and I've seen the big machine out there. So that's obviously a good use of or reuse of or recycling of organic waste, which can be reused locally. So I don't think we want to discourage that, and I'm sure that we can work that within the plan. And clearly it would be useful to understand when that is likely to come forward, so that we can have that conversation with Hillingdon as we go.
There's the technical control mechanism here, if you remember, was one that was embraced within that suite of covenants, the suite of assurances that we showed you in the context of the NFU debate, whereby where land had an importance to the mitigation of the railway looking forward through the operational phase, we would expect, in agreeing only to use that land temporarily, we would expect the landowner to give appropriate commitments which we could enforce. Now, obviously, that would provide the legal basis for the scenario in which you put to Mr. Miller. Mr. Miller showed how, in practice, that would be something that the planning authority would look to mediate in deciding whether or not to allow planning permission for a future development. But the Secretary of State would also have a stake in that, and he would need to consider separately from the planning process whether and on what terms he was prepared to release or to modify those commitments so as to allow some future use to take place, which might, in principle, seem to be in conflict with the environmental mitigation. Now, that his interest would probably be possible to align his interests in that respect with the public interest in devising what the then correct choice about land use for that land would be. But there would be those two separate strands to that which would need to be addressed.
Okay. Anyway, this is the second major item of discussion which you'd want to have, Mr. Briggs, for the project.
Yeah, I think what we wouldn't want to have is a situation where the Secretary of State is holding a landowner to ransom by being a beneficiary to a covenant where the landowner can't do anything with it. And I think that throws up a whole new issue, which I think we need to consider. I appreciate we need to have a further discussion with Mr. Miller, but the point I make is the timescale of this, and I would be grateful if you could give some HS2 some direction as to the timescale, because I've been on the receiving end of a timescale that seems to be manana on certain occasions, and I would like to be specific as to when HS2 are going to come and talk to us about these issues.
Well, I would like to report back to you on this before you complete your current sessions, that is to say, before the summer recess. Okay. I hope we can report back before.
Can we have a progress report before the summer recess? But
yeah.
We do need to sort this out, and I'd like to know definitively what's going on, certainly before the bill goes back to the House.
Yeah.
So that we can make adjustments being made.
Yeah. Can we just? I think we've covered the points of principle. But can we just put up P6931, because we focused on the Grundon land, and we ought not to ignore the points arising on the Dalton and the Dawson land. There's a question, I think we don't need to repeat the points you've just made, which apply to this land as much, but there is one point I'd like just clarity on. There's a concern amongst the landowners as to if they get this land back, whether they would be able to use it for grazing purposes. So we focused on development, but let's talk about grazing. Is grassland habitat something that is never to be used by cow or beast, or is it possible to manage it? Yeah.
So everything from this red line downwards would be essentially we're raising the ground, and as I said before, we're trying to put that ground back to the sort of current grain of the field structure, and then although we're enhancing the grassland for an ecological purpose, that is compatible with the uses that are currently there on site. So ultimately it will look similar, a bit raised, with the same sort of operation on it.
So it can be used for crops and for livestock?
Yes.
Is something else?
Cropping and cereal production and livestock. I mean, that's what it's used for at the moment. But it's termed in here as grassland habit.
Sorry, I didn't realise cereal in there. Then that would affect it.
A cereal is a grass crop. You know, it's a different type of grass.
Yeah.
But that's clarity that I need. Can we put fertiliser on it? Can we spray it? Or what can we do?
Okay. The land use there is for species-rich grassland throughout, so that's the plan there. So if there is cereal on there, that will, I believe, preclude that.
You could take a hay crop and you could graze it, I think is the point.
That's right. Yeah.
Can you put fertiliser on it?
No.
Okay. Right. Further
So
discussion?
Silage, hay?
It's that sort of thing, which is the sort of crops that you are generally associated with being species.
I think and these sort of discussions are better outside the room rather than inside the room. For us, what may matter is whether this has to be a species-rich grassland because it's connectivity there, or whether it's offset for some other place which is being disturbed. If it's a question of some other place which is being disturbed, then I think perhaps we ought to be prepared to listen to arguments about whether this is the right place to have that offset, or I'm sort of feeling my way into this.
It is partly offsetting from elsewhere, and it's partly dealing with replacing what is there already. And as Mr. Briggs said, I'm not trying to insult the landowners, by the way, it does support wildlife. So what we're trying to do is bring that back, and also to look at that as an offset of what else is happening elsewhere. So it is both in this land.
Would it be right for us to assume that in discussions with Mr. Briggs and his clients, that you and your ecological advisors can see whether there are particular things the farmers would like to have? And sometimes instead of having engineers' lines,
yes,
the local knowledge and local features can matter, and things and perhaps come out with the same kind of result, but much more happiness.
Certainly happy to have that conversation. I think that what we're saying about the trying to tackle the sustainable placement issue overall, although we don't have definitive answers for that because there's more work to be done. If we're able to reduce the area of sustainable placement here, that will start to free up that land and the type of response that we might be able to provide on that land. So there are a number of steps that we need to go through and that we need to develop through time, so that if, for example, we could get more material away by rail, we may find ourselves disturbing less land here. We may get to a point where, I can't guarantee it at the moment, but we may get to a point where actually there might be just a temporary need to use the land and then get away from that. And then we're likely to be in a different ecological kind of response.
So you wouldn't necessarily then need to have to take land to offset losses of species-rich grassland habitat elsewhere?
It's possible, yes.
So if the land returns to the farm, but it returns with a lower agricultural classification, but it can't generate income and cereals and other things on it, presumably that would be subject of compensation.
Yes, ultimately it gets to a compensation event. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's not always the ideal outcome, but there is that recourse.
If you turn grade 1 or grade 2 land into woodland, you're reducing its value by about
Yes.
sort of 14 parts and 15.
I don't believe this is grade 1 or grade 2 land.
What sort of grade is it?
Grade 3.
Grade 3. Okay, well, okay. Grade 3 land to woodland is still a significant reduction in value.
It is, yeah. The issue of woodland is on this other land up here, which is our response to the loss of woodland in the Cocktail cutting area. And I think you've seen the photographs yesterday about that. There's quite a significant piece of woodland. So our idea is to try and respond to that on the other side of the railway. That has a benefit from an ecological perspective and a landscape perspective, but it obviously has an impact on the farmer's land in this location.
There's also, I think, a belt of existing belt of woodland, isn't there, in this white land?
Yes, the Cocktail cover there. So there's a chunk of woodland belt there.
And that's not taken for the scheme. We're looking to avoid that.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
We try not to lose the woodland when if we can.
I'm not sure we get very much farther today, but the essential point is that the project is going to be a little more flexible and have a discussion with the petitioners about seeing whether they can meet some of the objectives the petitioner wants.
Yes, and we've set up the way forward for this actually with 2 letters that we sent to the Daltons and the Dawsons last week, which contain some assurances. I'm not going to show you them because they foreshadow the process that that we've just been discussing. Okay. But certainly that's the intention.
Right. The other thing I'd add to that is that we have had I believe a good meeting with the NFU, Country Landowners Association, CAAV as well, to make some progress on the farm pack that you've requested. We intend to, we're getting our thoughts together on that, about how we bring those objectives and aims together in one kind of portfolio, if you will. And we're intending to have that as an open discussion with those bodies in the summer, and hopefully we can come back in September with that pack in place, and hopefully that will provide further comfort to farmers that we've got a portfolio for each package of land. We all know what's going on, when, how we're going to go about the business, so that people can plan their business lives going forward.
Have you anything to add, Mr. Mulder?
Just one more point. It was relating to Schedule 15. Your committee's heard a lot about this, but just if I can just, for Mr. Briggs's benefit, remind you of Mr. Smith's evidence, which is in a nutshell to this effect. If agricultural land is made available to the Secretary of State on a temporary basis for construction works under Schedule 15, it will normally be considered economic for him to acquire temporary rights of occupation, provided the land concerned is planned to be used solely for agricultural purposes after it's handed back to the landowner. And that's the, as you recall, that's the means in practice of securing that the price we pay for temporary use is not materially higher than the price we would pay for permanent acquisition.
Okay. Any further points you want
I've
to
just
raise,
got
Mr. Briggs?
one more point, something to pick up earlier on. Could I go back to 62553, I think it is. I'm speaking from memory, mine isn't numbered here. It's a construction programme. I don't know whether, Mr. Miller, you can, this is your remit or not. If you look at that table, in the bottom section, rail installation works, on the second line it says construction of temporary railhead for Mass Hall. Is that the one that you're referring to in the West Ruislip railhead? Is that when it's constructed in the early part of 2018 on this programme?
I believe it is, yeah. I think that's in the second phase of the second phase drawing.
And then the red line is when it's removed in the beginning of 2022, is that right?
Yes, it is, yeah.
So that railhead will be there for 4 years?
Yes, I believe that's right. Yeah.
So there is an ability to move material from it for a 4-year period?
Yes, so there is, you're right, and that is subject to the detail, what the path availability will be at that point, yeah.
I think the point, Mr. Chairman, is this railhead will be there for 4 years. Coming back to the point of the sustainable placement, there's a 4-year window to move material from this site elsewhere. But that's the point I make.
I tell you, the elsewhere is the problem.
Well, I think there are places elsewhere. It's I think you heard from Mr. Miller previously, he said one of the issues was cost.
Yeah.
And then it comes down to the contractor, and the contractor doing things in the cheapest way. And we're balancing cheapness against actually something that once you've lost, you never get it back again.
No, it's not as straightforward as that. It is the availability of the paths on the network, ensuring that we can get that away as the tunnel is being built on that continuous
But you did
basis.
refer to costs from the contractor, Mr. Miller.
There are costs
additionally.
So I think that's a very interesting point there, that we've got a 4-year window. For as I can see, it can be done. I just worry that we're just looking at cheapness against all that else.
Okay.
Well,
That's the only other point I want to make.
I've explained to you we're looking at that.
All right, so you're going to go and chat with HS2 and hopefully have more than the chat, but actually get some decisions or answers of how your clients will be affected. And you're going to report back in September?
Yeah.
No, sorry, in
July.
In July, about how things are going.
Yeah. Just lest there be any misunderstanding for those who are watching, this slide should not be misinterpreted as an indication that the railhead will disappear at the end of the process here. As I said to Sir Peter, there will be a siding retained on a permanent basis at Harville Road. This is focusing on a different question. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't think a running comment on everyone who's presented evidence to us, whether as witness or as agent, but I think that it is notable, although there are other firms, Mr. Briggs, you have kept the issues that matter to the clients, the ones that are useful to us, and we thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to now move on to the next petitioner. We're going to have a 3-minute comfort break by committee request.
Thank you.
And then we're going to the schools in Ruislip. Order.
schools together.
Yeah. Order, order. Order. Welcome back, everybody. We now have petition 813, which is the governing body of Ruislip High School and the governing body of Ruislip Garden Primary School, and 1055, the governing body of Sacred Heart Catholic Primary School, being represented by Charlotte Jones. Welcome, good morning.
Good morning, thank you very much.
Can we have up where they are? And
yes, could I have P6843 just as an overview, please? So, as you know, I'm Charlotte Jones, although I'm mostly known as Lottie to family and friends, so Charlotte feels a little bit formal this morning. I'm happy for you to call me Lottie. I've also got with me Philip Cawthorne, who is the Chair of Governors at Sacred Heart Catholic Primary School. And we've decided today to join all three petitions together, hopefully to save you some time, because our issues are broadly the same. I've lived in Ruislip for 15 years, and I'm also the Chair of Ruislip Against HS2. I've represented the Ruislip community on HS2 matters for the last 5 years, and I'm regularly in touch with about 2,000 residents when I share HS2 information with. There are many people in Ruislip who would like to have petitioned, but haven't, because we've decided, as people did in Ickenham and Harefield, to take a collective approach. Otherwise, you would have had hundreds of people sitting here saying exactly the same thing. So I'm hoping on that basis you will allow me a little bit of time, not only to talk about the schools, but to talk about the wider community of the schools, of which they're an integral part of. And I'd like to introduce you to a little bit more of the Ruislip area, if I may.
okay.
Okay.
6843, I think, would be useful.
We're trying to get it. We're having a problem.
Okay.
Okay. So just a map of the whole area. So I'll carry on.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, I just want to start by giving you our overall position in Ruislip. As you'll know, the route through Ruislip here is planned to be in a tunnel. We are enormously grateful and relieved by that, but it wasn't always the case. The original route was planned to be overground, and the result of that would have been absolutely devastating to our community. And the blight and the stress that original overground route would have caused, and did cause at the time, has not been forgotten.
Colleagues were saying the Sacred Heart School is where the R of Ruislip is, where it says Ruislip High School.
Yes,
Right?
unfortunately the exhibits have kind of been
but that gives us the three schools,
yes,
yeah, I think.
Yes. So given that we have been mitigated with a tunnel, I'd like to say at this point that we totally support London Borough of Hillingdon's calls for an extended tunnel through Harefield and Ickenham, and if not all the way through the Combe Valley, then at least through Ickenham, so that the residents there might also benefit from the relief of mitigation of a tunnel as we've been afforded. So petitions today predominantly deal with West End Road and the proximity of the schools to West End Road, and in particular the traffic on West End Road, which will come as no surprise to the committee. I don't intend to keep repeating myself about how much traffic there is on West End Road already. My intention is to talk you through the issues of Ruislip and let you draw your own conclusions about how it will affect West End Road. So the other issues that we'll be dealing with these petitions are the effects on the community from the utility works. And I'd really like to emphasise at this point that we're not petitioning and we're not objecting against the utility work being carried out. We absolutely understand that it's a necessity. We know that it needs to be done before any tunnelling can take place, and it's part and parcel of the mitigation that we have. However, we are very concerned about the way in which the utility works are being planned. We don't think it's been done very well so far, and we think that unfortunately too little account of local issues has been taken into account of the surrounding areas. So we think it's vital that you as a committee understand our local concerns, and in order for the work to be planned better, we'd like to have a little bit more input with HS2 Limited, so that we can hopefully help the community to function throughout the work that needs to be done. So that's kind of our position in Ruislip. So if I could have my
if
first...
If you don't mind, I'll just make a little interjection here. I mean, I'm a school governor myself, right?
Yep.
And I actually think it's vitally important that HS2 have a proper consultation with the individual schools, because in the period when the youngsters are attending these schools during the construction phase, this is the period when it's these children's only chance at an education. And therefore, because of that, it's important that as much mitigation can be done to cut down the effects on the children's education, because it's the only chance they get. I think that's an important matter that we've all got to take on board. Doesn't matter where we come from.
So far, there hasn't been any consultation with any of the 3 schools, other than the interaction that myself and Peter have had with them. Sorry, Philip. Sorry, Philip. And none of the schools were actually sent any consultation information throughout the last few years. Okay, so could I have my first slide up, which is A1127? Sorry, brackets 2. Okay, so I'm going to start off with Ruislip Gardens Primary School. This is the school that my daughter attends, and I'm also chair of the parent forum there. The school is situated on Stafford Road on the Ruislip Gardens estate, and as you can see, we have 453 pupils at the moment and 96 staff. The school was expanded just last year. The expansion works have been finished, and we're now a 3-form-entry school, so it's expanded quite rapidly. And so the pupil and staff numbers will rise to 700 and 110 at full capacity in the next few years. The catchment area is obviously Ruislip. However, since the expansion, we're accepting children from further away: Northolt, Yedding, Hayes, and even as far away as Carpenter's Park, which is near Watford. Okay.
Is that because parents work in the vicinity of the school, do you think?
Sometimes, yes, and just because the catchment area has been widened.
Right.
So does any kids coming from Ealing at all to the school?
Not as far as I know from Ealing.
Is Northolt sort of on the boundary, a bit of Ealing and
Yeah,
a bit of
yes,
Hillingham?
That's right, yes. Okay, could I have the next slide, please? Okay, so this map shows you an aerial view just of the Ruislip Gardens estate. At the top end of the picture, you can see where the primary school is. And what I'd like to point out is the proximity of the estate and the school to the utility works planned on West End Road, which are denoted by the red arrows there. So the important thing to point out here is that whilst the estate is pretty large, the only access in and out of the whole estate is Bedford Road, and you can see the blue arrow pointing to it just there. So that's the only access to the whole estate, which is approximately 800 homes, as well as the school. Adjacent to Bedford Road is the access to the West Ruislip depot, which has been talked about quite a lot, which the committee might remember we visited briefly when you came to see the Colne Valley. It's not very easy to see on this map, but it is pretty much just a very small slip road adjacent to the end of Bedford Road. It's just a bit further up, that's it there. Okay, so this is a pretty dangerous junction at the best of times. It is controlled by traffic lights, but it does cause an awful lot of congestion and a lot of difficulty in turning out of Bedford Road, particularly if you're trying to turn left. Moving on then, it's not only residents and school children that actually come in and out of the estate. Sorry, I didn't mean the slides. If you could go back one. So it's not just residents and school children that would come into the estate. What you can see at the far end of Bedford Road, at the top of Bedford Road where these trees are, is the access point to Ickenham Marshes, which again we've been talking about a little bit, but this is Ickenham Marshes just behind the school here. So there are a lot of people that would come into the estate specifically to access the marshes. Local scout groups often camp up there, lots of dog walkers, families, that sort of thing. It's a very popular green space, and it's managed as a nature reserve by the London Wildlife Trust. In the bottom right-hand corner of this picture, you'll be able to see the proximity of RAF Northolt to the Ruislip Gardens estate. I haven't shown all of the aerodrome on that map, but just so that you can see the proximity there. Obviously, RAF Northolt brings in a lot of traffic to the area, not only by road, but also on the flight paths. The flights at RAF Northolt have recently increased to 12,000 a year, which averages at about 40 flights a day. This is significant because each time a flight goes over, the lights on West End Road will turn to red to allow the planes to come in low over the actual road. Given that there are an extra 7 sets of traffic lights between the Polish War Memorial and Ruislip Gardens, you'll be able to understand that the traffic is stopping an awful lot during the day. Given the proximity to RAF Northolt, there are also local concerns about the possibility of tunnelling in this area and also the utility works, throwing up the possibility of coming across unexploded munitions. This might sound a little bit far-fetched, but it's not as far-fetched as it might seem. When RAF Northolt recently, in the last few years, added some extra buildings onto this site, it is known that unexploded munitions were found on the site. Munitions have also been found within Ruislip, and most notably last year one at Ruislip Lido, I believe. There are often stories in the paper about and in the media about this sort of thing happening across London with these types of works. So there is a local concern, given that we are so close to these 800 homes here. Okay, so next slide, please. So this is Ruislip High School, which is located on Sidmouth Drive. This is a secondary school. It's a relatively new school, only opened in 2006. There are 971 pupils and 135 staff. Again, the catchment area is Eastcote, Northolt, South Harrow, and just out as far as Greenford. And I'm told that staff travel in from much further away than that, with the furthest away coming from Milton Keynes. It's Ofsted as an excellent school, and we attract some of the top teachers to this school.
Don't do excellent anymore, Ofsted. Outstanding. Outstanding. All right. Okay.
Thank you. Okay, you might or you might not recognise the picture of Ruislip High School, because it's also known as Rudge Park Comprehensive, from the popular TV comedy series The In-Betweeners, which is filmed at the high school. I'm rather hoping you haven't seen it, and if you have, I'd just like to say it doesn't reflect the pupils that go there now. Okay, so we go on to the next slide, please. Okay, so here again you can see the position of the high school in proximity to West End Road, and I've marked again the utility works with the red arrows. The access to Sidmouth Drive is at one end, West End Road, and at the far end, which is just slightly off this map, is Victoria Road, which is going to be the location, or the close location of the ventilation shaft. I think we had a little bit of confusion about whether the committee had visited Victoria Road and the vent shaft a couple of weeks ago. I'm fairly certain that you didn't visit the Victoria Road vent shaft in Ruislip, but it was the one near Old Oak Common. So I think the confusion arose because there are two Victoria Roads. But anyway, Victoria Road runs parallel to West End Road, and is just slightly off this map, but it goes into South Ruislip. So there's the two entrances to the access to the school. Okay, so I'd also like to point out then the importance of the green space behind the high school here. This whole area is used for PE lessons, for all outdoor activities that the students from Ruislip High have. It's also used before and after school. What you can't see marked out there is there's an athletics track, and the perimeter of the whole of that field is used for cross-country. Just to the far end of that, there is a footpath, which is the Jim O'Neill walk, which leads all the way up to Victoria Road. But what you can't see are all the little informal footpaths that run off that across this green space. There are an awful lot of people, particularly commuters, who would use this green space to cut across from South Ruislip, particularly from Bridgewater Road, and they'd be coming down onto West End Road to access the bus stops and Ruislip Gardens tube station. Just next to this red arrow here, where the utility work is planned to go onto this green space, it's not very obvious, but this is a children's play park. This is locally known as Banana Park. And there's also a small basketball area there too. And just across from there, the building right next to that play park is the 4th Ruislip Scout Hut, which has its access on New Pond Parade. Beavers, Cubs and Scout meetings take place there on a daily basis, as well as other community activities. Okay, so I think that's enough on that slide. Can you go on to the next one then, please? Okay, so this is our third school. This is Sacred Heart Catholic Primary School. It's located on Hurwin Avenue. We have 681 pupils and 95 staff. The catchment area is Ruislip, Harefield, Eastcote and Northwood, which is slightly further out, and this is because it's a faith school, and they accept children from other neighbouring parishes. This particular school is in the parish of the Most Sacred Heart Church, which is on Pembroke Road, which is located just off Ruislip High Street. So between the three schools, we've got over 2,000 children. It needs to be said that these are not the only three schools in the area. There are several more schools. We're very lucky in Ruislip. We have a choice of an awful lot of schools. But this gives you an idea of the density of the population here, that there are at least 3 or 4 other primary schools in the area and 1 other high school. Most of those will all come under South Ruislip, and I know that South Ruislip will be making a representation to you as well. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay, so you can see the location now of Sacred Heart School is just further up the other end of West End Road. It's further away from the planned utility works, but you can see from here that there is a section of utility work at the top end of Hurwin Avenue. There are only 2 entrances to what I'll call the Hurwin Avenue estate, both of which are accessed from West End Road. So there's very limited parking around the outside of the school for parents to drop off children, so a designated zone is made in the rugby club car park, which is just next door to the school. But the second drop-off zone is at the top of Hurwin Avenue, just at the top of where the utility works would be. Residents and parents all comply with a voluntary one-way system. When parents drive into the estate, they turn left and then take a circular route around Crozier Way and all the way up through Hurwin Avenue and round the corner. And if you're coming in at the bottom of the estate, you'd come in off West End Road and follow Hurwin Avenue all the way along. So both of those routes helped the traffic flow not only within the estate, but also off West End Road. And unfortunately, those utility works sit right in the middle of that one-way system. Just behind the top of Hurwin Avenue, you can also see these green spaces. Again, the fields here are used by the children for outdoor activities and PE. But the access to the fields behind the school is just at the top of Hurwin Avenue here. There are 2 gates here which you can't see on the map. But parents and residents and people coming in to use this as a recreational facility would use these access points at the top of the road.
Who owns those fields?
The London Borough of Hillingdon. So yes, so these green spaces are popular not only with the rugby club and rugby players, but runners, walkers, children come and play there. Okay, so can I move on then to the next slide, please? I hope so far everything that I've said to you helps you to kind of get a picture of where we are in Ruislip and and how West End Road is integral to getting access to those three schools and the surrounding areas. So this is a summary of the utility work that we've been given by HS2 Limited. We were only given it last month. We have been asking for details of the utility work for the last 2 or 3 years. We were told it wasn't available, but HS2 Limited have said that they have been actually working with the utility company since 2012, since we've been asking. So the chart here, you can see the number of assets to be either protected or diverted on West End Road, number 9, 6 on Bridgewater Road, 5 on Long Drive and Station Approach. I'm going to concentrate on West End Road for now, though. The chart predicts the best case scenario of timeframes as far as we understand it. We're told that it's possible that not all of this work will need to take place, and hopefully only 50% of the work will need to be taking place. However, it does say that this could be amended during the detailed design stage, so it could also be revised upwards. We did ask what the timescale would be in the worst case scenario, if indeed all 9 assets didn't just need protecting, but all 9 needed diverting, and we were told that those predictions didn't exist. So the prediction for West End Road is that the road would need to be dug up, if you like, for 6 months. As far as we know, there's a Victorian sewer that runs down the middle of West End Road, and that would be our main concern. I think the other 2 utilities possibly would be a smaller concern. I'm not 100% sure because we haven't got those details, but we do know that runs in the middle of West End Road. So 6 months sounds relatively insignificant after all you've heard about 7 to 9 years of construction sites in Harefield and in Ickenham. But in reality, 6 months is a long time when you're in such a densely built-up area and when so many people are relying on West End Road as their route in and out of Ruislip. If West End Road is held up for 6 minutes, believe you me, the rest of the borough knows about it. So I hope you'll understand the importance of that. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so now that you can see the whole area mapped out here, you can see that there are more utility works than just Herwin Avenue and West End Road. And I think it's important to say that this utility work on West End Road can't be viewed in isolation. It has to be taken into consideration with the work that's going to happen in South Ruislip on Bridgewater Road, Long Drive and Station Approach. We also have the ventilation shaft work that will be happening just up off Victoria Road as well. So the impact is cumulative as far as we're concerned. It's not all just happening in one place. It's the effect of how it will happen in the wider area. Again, I'm not going to talk too much about South Ruislip because they were making their own representations too. But this really kind of highlights the importance of looking at it all in the round and understanding how West End Road is absolutely vital in getting anywhere in this area and how it's going to be affected. It is in fact the displaced traffic that we are concerned with. We all know that West End Road is clogged up at the best of times. It very rarely runs freely. If anything happens up on the A40, you know about it within seconds. You've already heard how displaced traffic already comes through from other parts of Ruislip, but also from West Ruislip and from Ickenham. But it's the displaced traffic during that peak construction time, and in fact through the whole of the construction time, that's going to affect West End Road. The vast amount of traffic that won't be able to access the A40 at Swakeleys roundabout will undoubtedly be coming down West End Road in order to try and get to the Polish War Memorial, unless they go an enormously long route all the way around through South Ruislip and try and get onto the A40 via the North Hull exit. HS2 Limited have said to us, even as recently as the last couple of weeks, that there will be no significant impact on West End Road. And they cite this because it's not a construction route. I find that jaw-droppingly outrageous that they would think that there is no impact on West End Road. You only have to stand on the road for a few minutes each day to understand the reality of that. At this point, I'd just like to talk a little bit about Ruislip High Street, given that it is an extension of West End Road. The community, many residents, were particularly grateful that Tim Mould made an apology, I think it was last week, about the use, or the actual non-use, of Ruislip High Street. I would just, it was brushed over slightly during that presentation, so I just want to elaborate on that because it is really important. Because HS2 Limited caused literally years of confusion on this matter. The ES clearly described the use of the A4180 Berry Street, Ladygate Lane, and HS2 Limited negated that the High Street was ever included in the ES. It was clearly described as a construction route. However, there were never any maps of this area other than the ones that the London Borough of Hillingdon helped us to draw up to enable people to understand where that construction route would go. Through the community forums and meetings and letters and emails, we spent months trying to explain to HS2 Limited that the A4180 is in fact Ruislip High Street. And we have had apologies in the past and to say that they didn't understand that. However, they then went on to confuse people further by sending conflicting letters and emails, either saying it was to be used or it wasn't to be used, and now we understand that it will only be used in exceptional circumstances. So no maps were ever shown, no map ever showed the High Street, no corrected maps were ever issued, despite many requests, and no clear explanation or apology has ever been given up until now. So it is appreciated, but I think it's important to highlight it because it caused an enormous amount of confusion, an enormous amount of stress. In fact, leading one lady to sell her house on Berry Street because she just couldn't bear thinking that she might be on a construction route and she couldn't bear the stress of not knowing. Even now, in some of our PRDs, not mine, but in the Chamber of Commerce, HS2 Limited are still perpetuating this mistake. In a meeting recently, the PRD stated that they absolutely would not be using the A418, which we and the people in Oxford, I'm sure, will be very grateful for because it's not in Ruislip. So their mistake now is to call the A4180 the A418. There's still an awful lot of confusion with Breakspear Road being confused with Breakspear Road South. And again, this is really important because if they're saying that they're going to use Breakspear Road, this gives a completely different construction route to those exceptional circumstance lorries. So we would really ask HS2 Limited to make sure that they have truly understood the roads in our area. We'd like you to understand that I've only raised this point because it illustrates how little faith the residents have in HS2 Limited because they have failed to understand our road system, even understanding what they're called. And it has really shaken our faith in them that they will be able to engage with us if they haven't understood this simple detail. Okay, so concentrating back on West End Road, we've talked a lot about traffic. But what we haven't considered is how many pedestrians might use West End Road as well as cyclists. There are no pedestrian counts, but obviously with the amount of children walking to and from these 3 schools in the area, it's a significantly high volume of people that would walk up and down West End Road. Not only students, but people accessing buses, tubes, shops, homes, other leisure facilities. While we're talking about other leisure facilities, something that isn't marked on the map, but I'd just like to draw your attention to, just on the map where it says Ruislip Manor, just above there to the left, that's the site of our local football club, which rather confusingly is Wealdstone FC. It has a small stadium there, which has a capacity of 2,600. And whilst that would mostly be used at weekends, it is used an awful lot by the local football teams for the youth league. There's a lot of tournaments that take place there. But importantly, Wealdstone allow team coaches of fans to park up within their car park on match days at Wembley, so that the fans can come and use Ruislip station to get to Wembley on the Metropolitan line. So some weekends there can be an enormous amount of traffic coming in to park at the football club, and often there'll be coaches coming down there as well. Okay, so just moving further back up towards Ruislip Gardens, just want to draw your attention to the crossings that are vital in this area, and they fall right between the points of the utility work. There are two crossings, one between New Pond Parade, where people cross between the shops to get from one side of West End Road to the other, and the other is at the end of Bedford Road, which crosses over to Ruislip Gardens Tube Station. Ruislip Gardens Station is on the Central Line, and there are approximately 20,000 journeys made to and from Ruislip Gardens Station on a weekly basis. So that's an awful lot of people pouring in and out of the pavements around that area. West End Road has two bus routes, most notably the E7, which links Ruislip with Ealing. An awful lot of people use that route rather than the tube to save having to change, because there are two branches of the Central Line you need to change. But it's heavily used by students, commuters and shoppers. Then we also have the lesser known 696 bus route, which only has two buses daily that pick up children that go to Bishop Ramsay School, which is on the other side of Ruislip, going out towards Eastcote. It's a faith school, and so this shuttle bus is put on from one side of Ruislip to the other, and obviously if that bus is delayed, there are no alternatives for those children. So it goes without saying also that on New Pond Parade there are a series of shops and businesses. These will be highly impacted by the utility works, but I'm not going to talk about that too much now because that's going to be raised in a further presentation. So can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so these are some pictures from a presentation that was given to us on utility works, and they're provided by HS2 Limited. We'd like to believe that these utility works that are going to happen on West End Road are going to be this neat and seemingly unintrusive. If I could have the next slide, please. However, we rather think that the reality is going to be somewhat different. These pictures, I'm sure you may have seen some of these pictures before. I took these pictures on a site visit to the Victoria Dock when we went to visit Crossrail. And these were taken just last year, 2014. We were shown this site specifically as an example of what we might expect. So can I have the next slide, please? So the section to the left of this picture, so between the houses and this fence through the middle of the picture, was work that was being carried out on a sewer, rather like possibly what might happen on West End Road.
It's fine. You're taking a bit too much on this bit. And the question is, will there be access to the school and will there be a gyratory system? That seems to be the key issues.
Yes, but also how long the utility works might take.
We don't need too much on this.
Okay, that's fine. I can move on.
It's for them to answer that. It's not
Okay.
Please.
Just to say that the work on this site that we were taken to had been in place for over a year. And there had been over 100 complaints already made.
That's there. What we're looking forward to is what's going to happen with you. But this bit is not the best bit for you to be going on about.
Okay, I just want to demonstrate that we were taken to this site to be able to understand how the utility works might affect us, and this is what we have to go on. Okay, so next slide is one more picture, just to show that the space between the utility work and these houses was just space for one person, a bicycle or a single buggy, but there was actually no room to manoeuvre those things alongside of these works. what seriously concerned us was that there was no designated access for emergency vehicles, and we were told that in the case of an emergency, the vehicles would actually have to come through the middle of the construction site and they'd have to make way that way. We were told that workers often had to help people with their shopping and deliveries by taking them through the construction site and handing them over the fences or actually through the windows of their houses. So this would be particularly pertinent to the utility work on Bridgewater Road.
We've got the point, please.
Fine. Okay, I'm going to then hand over to Philip, who's going to talk a little bit more.
Thank you. First of all, if it's helpful, I can assure you that I will be brief. I've no slides, but there are three aspects that I would like to comment on and make some additional comment on briefly. And they relate to air quality, traffic impact and HOAP. I'm Chair of Governors at Sacred Heart Catholic Primary School, where I've been a governor since 2002. Until last year, I was also a parent at the school, which all four of my children have attended. 3 of them suffer with asthma, so I can very much identify with these problems on a personal level. And when all is said and done, this is all about impacts on people's lives. I would add that I talk to you not as a subject expert on public health and air quality, rather to present a human account of the existing impact of traffic volumes. Much has been said about that. I would just add that the assertion from High Speed 2 Limited, as set out in their petition response document, that there will be no increase in traffic volumes in West End Road, betrays a woeful ignorance of the reality in Ruislip to anyone who lives there. The committee will already have heard and will continue to hear from petitioners in relation to air quality issues, whose evidence I endorse and support, and there was a first-class example of that from the Ickenham Residents Association. I would endorse that too. But I do think it's important that I speak about them in the context of local schools in the Ruislip area. There has undoubtedly been an increase in the prevalence of asthma. Staff at Sacred Heart tell me this is becoming more and more evident among younger children. The Director of Public Health, London Borough of Hillingdon, tells me that there is a growing body of medical evidence highlighting heightened concerns about the potential risks from environmental pollution to people with respiratory and other such illnesses. Asthma attacks, I can assure you, are very serious and frightening for an affected child and can also be very stressful for people who witness them, particularly parents. And I know that from experience. We've already heard about concerns about construction and development around High Speed 2 and traffic impact, but I would just add to that, if I may, that much of the increased traffic will be standing still, given the likelihood of gridlock, and therefore the emissions will be of greater concern. Just to give some figures in terms of numbers, it's estimated that there are approximately 3,500 school-aged children living with asthma in Hillingdon. Over 554 children aged 5 to 9 with asthma are estimated as living within 1 kilometre of the High Speed 2 route, out of which 192 are within 1 kilometre of the route above ground, and 362 are within 1 kilometre of the proposed tunnel works. Sacred Heart has an estimated 47 out of a total of 671 children with asthma. Although we have defined levels of acceptable air quality in Europe, the NHS Choices website states that there is evidence that there are significant health risks below this threshold. There is no evidence of a safe level of emissions, which is a point that I would like to make. Turning briefly to road safety issues, a joint OECD and UNICEF study found that the majority of serious injuries suffered by children are through being hit by cars, and the majority of these by other parents driving children to school. Now, at Sacred Heart, over the years, we have done our best to be good neighbours, to minimise the road traffic impact of our school, with an active Safer Routes plan, a walking bus, walk to school days, as well as developing 2 drop-off areas designed to maximise traffic flow, as Lottie has indicated, to reduce the impact on the wider road network. We have also done this to minimise the risk of injury, but of course it is a constant challenge requiring vigilance at all times.
Having said that, staff tell me that existing traffic levels frequently result in people arriving late at school, whether that's staff or parents, people who you would have thought have allowed a reasonable time for the journey. And of course, getting back into the main traffic system from the drop-off point, you can often become gridlocked. So the whole thing comes to a standstill. That's the situation now. So the concern for us then is that additional traffic, which we contend would exist as a result of the development that is being put forward, would exacerbate those problems and reduce our ability to be good neighbours moving forward.
In a nutshell, it's kind of your assertion that although there's very little direct traffic from HS2, there will be a lot of displaced traffic from the other routes. Which
that is very much my point. Absolutely. Although I'm not a governor at Ruislip Gardens or Ruislip High School, since the committee has so kindly agreed to hear all three Ruislip school petitions together, I am in a position to add that the figures for children suffering from asthma in Ruislip Gardens and Ruislip High are 43 out of 453 and 134 out of 971 respectively. I would just briefly add that Ruislip Gardens also promotes the Walk to School initiative along with Big Pedal and has significantly increased provision of bike and scooter parks to encourage more school journeys that way. And again, these initiatives could be similarly compromised as we see it as a result of high-speed 2 construction traffic. I would like to make a final point about HOAC. I endorse the comments of the previous petitioners about HOAC. This is a wonderful facility and plays a much cherished part in the curriculum and recreational activity of our pupils and contributes significantly to their health and well-being. Indeed, Sacred Heart were there only last week. We take 90 Year 6 children annually for 2 full days and have done so for the last 8 years, and we're hoping to extend that to Year 5 children next year. The site offers opportunities for environmental studies, and the water sports would not otherwise be readily accessible to us. Similarly, Ruislip High will be taking Year 10 pupils there in July, as will Ruislip Gardens, who are taking their Year 6 leavers. Now, these trips are often booked a year in advance, and the uncertainty as to the future of HOAC could sadly result in schools having to plan alternative trips from 2017. Now, the suggestion of High Speed 2 Limited during the HOAC presentation that the facility could somehow be used during construction is plainly absurd, as schools just wouldn't consider trips there unless it was maintained in its current form or at a new location. That concludes my comments. Thank you for listening, and I will hand back to Lottie, who will come on to the community requests. Thank you very much.
So I hope overall we've given you just a snapshot of Ruislip life and the surrounding community, and how we think that the utility work is going to impact on us. As you know, we have had some assurances already which were sent through to us last week. If I could have slide P6852, which is the letter of assurance. Most of the assurances that we've had have been to do with the timing and coordination and the phasing of the utility works. We certainly welcome these assurances, and we're very encouraged by the offers that we've been given to take into consideration our main concerns. And so we do accept the insurances in principle. However, the governing bodies of the 3 schools have yet to meet for their final meeting of the year, and it is something that we will need to go and feed back to them and get some feedback from them also. But on principle, we would like to push a little bit further on these assurances, and we do require some further clarification of some of the wording to ensure that the community involvement is integral at every stage of the planning of this work. So we'd like to clarify what the word engage means. We think it should mean a full and proper consultation with regular meetings. We'd like to be able to trust that this will be more than a box-ticking exercise and an infinitely better experience than our community forums were. Where HS2 Limited talk about reasonable notice, we'd like very much to be involved in deciding what that reasonable notice is. We'd like to have some communication with the school to help them to help the community to plan in advance for the work. Where the wording says, shall have regard for, kind of implies that they'll listen to us and listen to our concerns, but not necessarily implement them. So we very much want to stress how much input we want to have here. And we'd also like to have written explanation where our concerns can't be met, so that we can explain to the community how and why that has happened. We should also like the community to receive regular communication from HS2 Limited, particularly through leaflets and letters. Popping something on a website or on Twitter isn't really enough for our community. And up until now it has been left to community groups to help display information in the community and get information out. And we feel that should be down to HS2 Limited and not to us to do. So we do have a few further requests that haven't actually been addressed, and I'll just run through those very briefly, and then that will be us finished. So we'd like to see a transport plan that specifically ensures that the E7 and the 696 bus routes won't be disrupted. We'd like safer provisions of alternative pedestrian crossings during the work time. We'd like to be guaranteed that there will be unrestricted access to the green spaces that we've talked about, but also to include the access to the 4th Ruislip Scout Hut from New Pond Parade. If access to the play park is temporarily lost, we would like to have some sort of alternative provided. And as far as air quality is concerned, the schools would like to request pollution monitoring at each school location in order to be able to inform HS2 Limited if the levels become unacceptable, and so that we can work out a plan to reduce the traffic in the area if that becomes the case. Stating the obvious, we would like equivalent facilities to be provided should HOAC close. As far as RAF Northolt is concerned, we'd like to see some contingency plans with HS2 talking to RAF Northolt, even in the most unlikely of events of finding any unexploded munitions in the area. The school and the residents closest by would be particularly grateful to know that there was a plan should any emergency arise or any security risk arise. And lastly, we'd like to see a contingency plan in the event of any disruption to the utility services. I know that HS2 Limited have said that they will give prior notice to residents when the work begins, but in the event that the water gets cut off for an hour or two here or there, would have a significant impact on the school, on all the schools, in fact, even if the electricity or the gas or whatever it was, without any of those services for even a couple of hours, the schools would need to close. So we'd like to see some sort of contingency plan should an emergency arise. And that's the end of our requests.
Right, thank you very much. Mr. Lord.
I'm pleased that the assurances that you see on the screen have been welcomed, and I'm pleased that, broadly speaking, they seem to provide a sensible way forward to seeking to manage any effects, principally from traffic, that may result from the utilities works that may be carried out along West End Lane and Helvin Avenue and the other roads that you've thought. I'm conscious of the fact that we're here dealing with a petition by two schools, I think, or 3 schools, rather than a community petition. And so I'll focus my comments on that. It's important to bear in mind, of course, that the main construction works here are being carried out underground. This is an area which is where the railway is in tunnel. The petitioner has very fairly acknowledged that. You, I think, have already been told, and you're aware of the reason why provision is made for utilities works at various places along the route of the tunnel section. Broadly speaking, twofold. Firstly, precautionary measures to protect public interest from service outages, to use the jargon, and secondly, asset protection to protect the utility company's assets. And as has been alluded to in the presentation just now, the expectation is that by no means all of the works that are assessed in the environmental statement will actually need to be carried out. That will only become clear when we're at a more detailed stage of development of the project. But the key point is, returning to what is on the screen, that those who build the railway and who need to coordinate investigation, monitoring of the utilities in question, and a decision as to whether any works are required and the extent of those works, that they should, before they do so, that they should engage with the schools that you have heard about today, so as to understand how the schools work, any particular concerns that they have, any particular effects that digging up the street might have on those schools, the way kids get to school and that kind of thing, and that they should seek to accommodate those as far as they reasonably can into their detailed working plans. And engagement means listening to what the schools tell those at the point when they're planning the details of the works in question, so that as far as they reasonably can, what the schools tell them about the possible conflict between the works in question and the operation of the school, that they can be accommodated. Now, they can't always be accommodated because, as we know, if you do have to dig up the street for a few weeks and you have to operate a temporary traffic light system, then there will probably be some disruption to parents bringing their children to school in the morning. But again, you can seek to mitigate that by the hours during which the works in question are being done, and it's commonplace not just for this project but for other projects carried out in urban areas such as this to build into their detailed construction arrangements some accommodation of school drop-off times and school pick-up times to allow for that. And that's the sort of thing that's envisaged in the Code of Construction Practice. A key point I want just to remind the committee of from last week, which Mr. Mearns raised with me when he drew the analogy of herding ferrets, I think. In this case, this railway is going to be built under the powers conferred by the bill. And where utilities companies are deploying their own existing powers to do works which are part and parcel of the HS2 project, I've given an undertaking to this committee on day one that the Secretary of State will require those works to be undertaken in accordance with the construction commitments that he has given through the Code of Construction Practice and so forth, so that there is an opportunity to bring some level of coordination to the way these works are done. So that there is, and that's the way that other projects of this kind have been constructed. And broadly speaking, the experience, I think I'm right in saying, has been that it's been it's worked reasonably well. I'm not saying that there isn't. Well, I'm sure that people could come forward and point to instances where things have not done as well as they might have done. That's, if I may say so, that's inevitable. But broadly speaking, it provides for a sensible and workable solution. And these assurances are designed to are given against the backdrop of those general provisions in the Code of Construction Practice and the undertaking that I gave. So that's by way. If one then turns to the plan and just sees what is actually envisaged here, if we turn to 6851. On West End Lane, you can West End Road. I do apologise. On West End Road, you'd see that the area within which utility works are provided for is as shown on the plan, and you get if you just read the little box with the number of assets, you see 9 assets to protect or divert. Anticipated duration of construction works is up to 6 months, and then you get a sense of the daily vehicle movements and the number of workers associated. Now, as I say, that can be no more than an estimate at the moment, but that gives a sense of the
scale. It's an estimate. Are we talking it all being done in 6 months, or are we talking about, a month closure to do something and then 2 months go by and then another month? Or
they don't know what needs doing.
Well, But I think what we can say is that we would expect, broadly speaking, at this stage, looking forward, we'd expect these works to be done towards the beginning of the project, because they are protective works by and large. So that one would want to ensure that the protection is in place before one brings the main tunnelling work through the subsoil at depth in this area.
But I'm just wondering there, given the number of people who are actually working on that, and the time period, would it be possible to do a more concentrated, concerted effort, say, during the summer holidays, for instance?
It may well be. I can't say to you, I know this is frustrating to people, I can't say to you, yes, we can commit now to doing any works that are required, including investigations and so forth, during the summer of 2018. I can't say that. But certainly it will be in the contractor's interest. This is one begins to sound like a bit of a broken record, but it will be in the contractor's interest to try to time works which might otherwise cause disruption to traffic and so forth, because during term time there tends to be more traffic on the road than there is during the summer holidays past the school. It will in his interest to try and take that into account in planning his works. He can't allow that tail to wag the construction dog, but he can take it into account and try and draw an appropriate balance.
But the promoter could endeavour to work with contractors to endeavour to do that where not possible.
And that's what we say in paragraph 2 on page 68522. That's what we've said in the assurance that's been given, which has been welcomed by the petitioners. If we just go back to that, P68522. See that one of the things that we've said we'll seek to do is to coordinate any separate elements of the utilities works on any particular relevant road, phased so as to minimise the overall impact due to associated traffic restrictions in the area. And one I passed over, the second bullet, timing of any particularly disruptive short-term activities to avoid hours of peak activity for schools or businesses. So that sets out the approach that we are committing to follow here. And the detail of it is, I'm afraid, yet again, something that we simply can't commit to at this stage, because we just don't know. So I think this is, if I may say so, our case is that we're moving forward on the right path here. Now, Ms. Jones referred to a number of detailed matters that she would like us to consider, building on this assurance letter. Rather than try to respond to those now, I would suggest that is something that is we respond to her on those points with a further letter. Some of them, indeed many of them, having heard what she says, I think the response will be that they are so unlikely to happen that it's not necessary to give any sort of assurance. For example, given that the limited amount of work, the limited nature of the work that we may have to do in the vicinity of these schools, the idea that we are going to obstruct, to prevent access to local open space seems to me to be, frankly, fanciful. But I think we best write to her about that rather than to ventilate that before.
Okay, there are a couple more points. Mr. Mayon's made the point about engaging with the schools. I mean, the schools are a source in the sense they have the emails of all the parents, and so providing that the schools know in advance what's going to happen, then the parents will be organised. And one of my perceptions is that Hillingdon parents seem more disciplined and organised than parents elsewhere. We've heard on a number of occasions about voluntary one-way systems and everybody else. So if that is the case, then it would seem to me that one could manage the difficulties a lot easier.
Yes, and the 3 is designed to ensure. I mean, one is engaging. I mean, what I envisage here is that a meeting will be set up between the local liaison of the construction. The nominated undertaker with the school it's in advance of any works beginning and in advance of knocking down the plans for those works in the area, and that meeting will then lead to a timetable being put forward for the school to work to, so that they can then notify the parents. That's how these things are going to be dealt with in practice.
The other point raised about West End Road, if you come past the Polish Memorial and you go up the road, there are lots of traffic lights, and you get by Northolt and you get held up. Usually it's a few cars rather than lots of cars. I think that does need to have a conversation to see whether that could be dealt with, because we're going to need to look at ways of freeing up traffic in the area, because there'll be knock-on effects on West End Road.
Well,
even
these works will be because there is at least a more than a possibility of HS2 related traffic being on West End Road in relation to these utilities works. The use of that, the way the traffic uses that road, timing and so forth, will form part of the traffic management plan for the area. So we'll have to look at those questions with the council. This won't be one of those ones where there'll be a requirement for a Schedule 16 consent, I don't think, because the numbers are too low for that. But in the Code of Construction Practice at Clause 14, we specifically refer to the need for traffic management plans to cover all the range of works, and to consider particularly the effect on schools. That's one of the factors that's mentioned specifically. Can I just deal with the air quality point? I mean, this is a point that you've heard about a couple of times. Can we just put up a slide which is P6939? This is the slide that brings up to date on MAP the revised work that we've told you is going to be published in a supplementary environmental statement fairly shortly. And although I'm afraid it's not terribly easy to read, what you see is that the routes that are mapped here are the main construction routes for the railway. I don't know if we can blow this up slightly. And as a result of the various factors that you've heard about over recent days, such as the use of clean vehicles, the revisiting of our modelling and so forth, we're now showing that essentially the effect of the HS2 traffic on existing air quality is negligible. And it's important here to see that where these two schools are located away off to the right, so well away from the concentrations of air quality issues that might, at least in theory, arise from the use of roads through Ickenham by significant proportions of HS2 traffic. So even allowing for some local dispersal, our modelling is not showing any real prospect of any effect on air quality in the immediate vicinity of these schools. That's the point. Okay. And the final point was that Crossrail site that you were showing, it's important to bear in mind, that's a tunnel portal work site. It does, of course, include some utilities works, but it's nothing like the sort of works that those who have the railway running underneath them in tunnel are going to experience. And it was shown, and the visit was to enable people to see, principally to see how a work site to support, in this case, the Ruislip tunnel portal was likely to look based on experience.
Okay. If you are to write to the petitioner, dealing with some of the more detailed points in the presentation, can you copy it to the committee, please?
Yeah.
So that we have sight of
course,
what's being discussed. That'd be great. Ms. Jones? Ms. Jones?
I would just come back on one or two of those points. As I said to Sir Peter, that the utility work that I showed in those photographs was literally the section to the left-hand side, and I did point that out, and that was all utility work at that point of the construction site. We are still concerned about the air quality given the amount of displaced traffic that we still don't think has been taken into consideration enough on West End Road, but I won't labour that point too much any further. As I said, we've welcomed the assurances, but we would request some further clarification on some of the points in our requests. And we're grateful that we have been offered to meet and that meetings will happen with the school. So I'd quite like to determine when that might start. And I think, however unlikely some of these outcomes that we're concerned about are, we would still like to see some contingency plans in place given how densely populated the area is and how many people we're talking about that are likely to be affected. So we would like that reassurance, even if they are unlikely scenarios, we would still like to see something in place for those, please. So just in summary, we hope that you have understood the importance of why we've raised all these concerns to you today. We didn't bring the petitions before you lightly. Because we are a London borough, we are literally thousands of people that would be affected, even in a short space of time for utility works. Ruislip is a very large but very close community, and it works very hard to function in harmony with its environment. And we feel it's vital that if HS2 does eventually go ahead, that we should protect our community from the disruption, and that we have the best possible mitigation that we possibly can against the effects of such an enormous project that will have absolutely no benefit to our local area. Thank you for your time.
Can I say one sentence that, from my experience, that nominated undertakers can be required to do things. They need to make sure their contractors and their subcontractors and the utilities contractors and subcontractors take account of the assurances which are being offered. And can I suggest that you may consider putting in a subsequent letter that not just the undertaker but the others would be involved in trying to meet the requirements of the local community and the schools?
I'm happy to do that, but I reiterate what I've made on a number of occasions now, which I suspect you prompting me to repeat this, that in this case the effect of the statute is that the nominated undertaker is responsible for effectively underwriting the performance of these matters by his chain of subcontractors, and in order to ensure that he has redress on that, he's going to make sure that he builds in very clearly into the subcontracts all those relevant commitments that have been made in the area within which the subcontractor is working, so that he can hold them to it.
Indeed. Look, I just say, for the sake of worrying everybody, that when electricity work was done outside my home in my constituency, the notification to residents came a week after the work had been completed.
Yeah. There's still a puddle which forms every time it rains outside my house, which was the little lake that was created. So by the last time there was some waterworks done there. So I understand the point. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
And we're going to meet again at 2 o'clock. Order.
Thank you very much.